Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Commission to study college affordability and college completion. I'll do sort of what we do in Education Committee and gavel us in to start off this afternoon. I'm really excited to be here with all of you. We're going to start with introductions and go around, but first a little initial housekeeping. Just a reminder to all of the commission members, this is being live streamed over YouTube as well as the audio. We'll highlight the commission website as well, so folks can find that link at any time, or if they have any questions about the materials or where to go back and be able to watch this on YouTube. It is being archived, so if you have any questions or want to relook at any presentations, it's a convenient place to go back and take a peek. So just as a reminder, it's live, so keep that in mind with your comments. And with that, we'll jump right into introductions. I'm Assistant Senate Majority Leader Maddie Daughtry. It is my distinct honor and privilege to represent Senate District 24, which are the communities of Brunswick, Harpswell, North Yarmouth, Freeport, and Pownell. And I am also excited to be a member of the Joint Standing Committee of Education and Cultural Affairs. I'm going to introduce my House co-chair, the esteemed Representative Ed Crockett, and then we'll go around and have everyone else do their introduction as well. So take it away, Representative Crockett.
Thank you very much, Senator Daughtry. As Maddie said, I'm Ed Crockett. I represent District 43, which is part of Portland and part of Falmouth. I also serve on the Education Committee, and very excited to be the House Chair of this commission. And I appreciate Maddie being here because she has had more experience doing this than I do.
Thank you so much, Representative Crockett. And I'm not seeing, do we have Senator Woodson with us this afternoon?
Senator Woodson is unable to attend, as is Ron Milliken, representing the financial aid officers for this particular meeting, but they assure me they'll watch the recording closely.
Perfect. Thank you, Sam. So then we'll have Representative Salisbury, if you could introduce yourself.
Oh, thank you very much. My name is Sue Salisbury, and I represent House District 35, which is part of Westbrook. I'm also a member of the Education and Cultural Affairs Committee, and also a senior at USM.
Woo!
So, perspective there.
Thank you so much. And then Representative Roach, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Representative Tim Roach. I'm from Wells in the District 7, also a member of the Education Committee, and currently teaching, so I'll be in and out a little bit, but I'll try to be here as much as possible. I would like to say congrats to Representative Crockett on his book launch. I read a lot about it, and I want to just say congrats to him.
Agreed. Here on that. Congratulations as well. Up next, Hilary Bush, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Hi, I'm Hilary Bush. I'm the guidance director here at Poland Regional High School, which is RSU 16.
Thank you so much. And Robert Clark, please.
President DeLugos is representing the independent colleges in President Clark's absence.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jim DeLugos from St. Joe's, and I'm also currently the president of the Maine Independent College Association. So I'm sitting in for Bob and representing Micah schools today.
Thank you so much for joining us. And then President Dagler. Oh, you're on mute. It's not officially a Zoom meeting until you're off mute.
Yeah, I got it. Thank you, Senator Daughtry. I'm Dave Dagler. I'm president of the Maine Community College System.
Thank you so much. And Martha Johnston, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Thank you very much. I'm Martha Johnston. I'm the Director of Education at the Finance Authority of Maine.
And Jason Judd.
Hi, everybody. Jason Judd, Executive Director at Educate Maine.
Thank you. And you said that Mr. Milliken is unable to be with us. So up next, please correct me if I'm saying your last name wrong, but Robert Placido?
Anything with a smile. So great to be with you all today, and nice to see some of you again and meet the others. And Robert Placido, Vice Chancellor, Academic Affairs for the University of Maine System.
Thank you so much. And Colleen Quint.
Hey everybody, Colleen Quint. I'm the President and CEO of the Alphonse Scholarship Foundation.
Thank you so much. And Liz True.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Liz True. I'm the VP for Student Affairs at Maine Maritime Academy.
Great to see you. And then if our esteemed, incredible staff, Becky Smith and Sam Warren, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves.
Hi, I'm Becky Smith. I am the Director of Government and Community Relations for the Maine Community College System and the Legislative Liaison for Maine Maritime Academy.
Good afternoon. Great to see everyone. I'm Sam Warren, Director of Government and Community Relations for the University of Maine System.
Thank you so much. And I think that covers all of the commission members, correct? I'm seeing heads nodding, so that's always a good sign. I think in the interest of, me being a little bit late, I think we'll start, the ball rolling to try to get things going. But I do want to let folks know, and probably towards the close, I'm going to bring up the commission website to be able to screen share that. Unless Becky or Sam, if either of you have that handy, we could do a quick screen share to show folks where the resources will be. Let's see, get that. But we can jump to that later if that's easier, Sam, unless you want to try doing that. Oh, there we go. So this is going to be our home away from home in the landscape of being virtual. So for everyone watching along and for commission members as well, this is our website for the commission. It has the resolve, which goes over everything we need to go over, which actually, if you wouldn't mind, Sam, is probably a good place to sort of go over our duties. We're going to be looking at, kind of jokingly calling this the Commission 2.0, because there was a prior commission that I was honored to be a part of before, and there's some familiar faces on this commission as well. So a portion of that is looking at the 2014 commission and sort of updating the affordability gap analysis that we did. Another portion is reviewing the average debt incurred by students graduating from our community colleges and public universities, Maine Maritime Academy, as well as our private universities in the state. And I'm really excited to be having representation from all of those different institutions as well. And also, we're going to be looking at the average debt incurred by students who begin but do not complete courses, the sort of stranded learners that we've heard about a lot on the Education Committee as well. And also looking at the average debt incurred by students who are not completing it for graduate degrees, and also for private and not private or for-profit institutions. We're also going to be looking at the impact of this on student borrowers. And also, one of the things that I'm really excited for this commission that the prior one really didn't look into is examining sort of the capacity of the high school counselors and academic advisors throughout the state to really help our students be able to make those next steps, and looking at all the post-secondary opportunities, including CTE and the financing of those next steps. And also examine the potential impacts of no-cost community college on the workforce and in the state. And real quick, before we go back to the website, I think one of the things we're really excited for those of us who are coming from the Joint Standing Committee on Education and Cultural Affairs is these conversations always come up. When we're looking at different bills dealing with student debt, and a lot of us have wished we had a place sort of out of the traditional committee structure to really dig in with all of you with your expertise to really have these weighty conversations that are not just sort of limited to the public hearing and work session. So I think this is really exciting to be able to have, a good chunk of the committee here and to be able to jump into this work with all of you. And Sam, if you wouldn't mind going back to the base of the website, we've got our meeting dates, our background materials, and one of the things I would like to draw attention for all the commission members, and we'll be hearing from NEVI, the New England Board of Higher Ed, a little bit later in our work, but we do have a really wonderful background that NEVI has put together for us. That's a really great asset that really goes over and looks at a lot of the different average costs and, big takeaways of the post-secondary analysis. And especially what's nice about this report is it looks at it from a New England sort of regional outlook, which will be pretty beneficial in all of our work. But just wanted to make sure that draw everyone's attention to that. And please let us know if you have any questions. You can also always get, the agenda and all of the good fun stuff on that website as well. And even though we got a little bit of a late start, I think we're a little bit early. So I think if everyone's okay, unless any questions on the website or anything on the duties or charges. And I will say for folks for Zoom, for asking a question, if you can use the raise hand function, that's typically the fastest way for myself and my co-chair to see your hands go up. But also if that doesn't work, don't hesitate to do the good old fashioned waving your hands around. I'll try to make sure we get to call on everyone as well. Not seeing any questions. Let's jump out of the screen share, Sam. And then if it's okay, I think we should jump into our first presentation. Martha Johnston, if you're ready and willing, I think it's time to jump right in.
I am. Thank you very much. Let's see if I can get this screen share to work the way I want it to. Nope. Are you seeing my email? Yeah, we knew that would happen, right? Hang on. Okay. Let's try this again.
Fingers crossed.
Yes, fingers crossed. Can you all see that?
Yes, just need to
put it in the view. Yep, slideshow view. Let's see if we can do that. Sorry about that.
Martha, you may need to activate click that activate button.
Yeah, that's actually been a perennial issue. Thank you.
The first time you clicked on it, it did full screen. So. Oh, I think if you click the, see the resume slideshow, the little tiny gray button, if you put your mouse up, it's sort of to the right.
I think.
Yes, no, maybe.
No. All right, let me do one more thing. I apologize, everyone.
Martha, I have it up as a PDF. I'm happy to, if that's easier, to just jump in and start sharing.
Sure.
That.
If you want to drive, that'd be great, Sam. Okay, great. So thank you all for having me here today. Many of you know the Finance Authority of Maine. For those of you that don't know the Finance Authority of Maine, we are a quasi-independent state agency and we work on economic development and workforce development. And really when we say workforce development, we mean helping people pay for education after high school. So I'm the Director of Education. I often think of us as having 4 content areas, and those content areas are helping people save for education after high school. We're the administrator of the Next Gen 529 program. So many of you are probably familiar with that program. We also have a college access and outreach team. So we actually help counsel families about the financial aid process and actually help them complete the financial aid form. So the free application for federal student aid, fondly referred to as the Fafsa. Many of you have probably heard of that. Then we also actually administer the state's largest need-based grant program, which is the Maine State Grant. We're very, very fortunate this year for the first time to have increased our award from $1,500 to $2,500 when we received an additional $10 million in appropriation. So we are working with a total appropriation of just north of 25 million. And so that's wonderful news for Maine students. In addition to the Maine State Grant, we administer other forgivable loan programs or low interest rate loan programs in exchange for return service. And then last but not least, we actually do work in financial education, financial wellness, financial capability. This is actually incredibly important work, and we're expanding that work moving forward because we see Maine families' ability to maintain their financial wellness or achieve financial wellness as a critical aspect of college affordability. So today I'll talk very briefly about the basics of college affordability. You have many more presenters who will be following me, who will be more specific about the different sectors of college affordability. I'll talk briefly about the Minnesota model that they put together. I will define cost of attendance, net price, and percent of need met as it relates to higher education. And I will talk a little bit about average student loan debt. I'll talk a little bit about national, but I will also talk about Maine specific. Again, I won't necessarily talk about sector specific. And then I will make sure that you are aware of FAME's college affordability efforts. Some of them you've heard me mention already, the Maine State Grant Program, our Fafsa Completion efforts. We have started new messaging around affordability, which I'll discuss, our expansion of financial education, and then of course our Next Gen 529 program. If you want to move on, Sam, thanks. So I want to define college affordability for you, but it can't be defined. And it can't be defined because college affordability is not only subjective, it's relative. So relative to schools being different costs and having different financial aid opportunities, but subjective because as the consumer who's pursuing that education after high school, what's affordable to me may not be affordable to someone else, but interestingly, what I perceive as affordable, somebody else might not perceive as affordable. So it's subjective as well as relative. It's also worth noting that expensive can be different than unaffordable. So I was a nearly first generation student, and I went to a school that met full need. So they were very expensive, but they were very well endowed. And because they met my family's full demonstrated financial need, it was a school that was affordable to me. Conversely, I could have easily gone to a different school that did not have as many endowed funds as the one I intended. It could have been that I was expected to pay more than what my family could reasonably afford. And so then that school would have been unaffordable, even though maybe it wasn't as expensive. So again, expensive can be different than unaffordable. And I think it's worth putting all that into context as we think about college affordability and how nebulous it is to define that. So I stumbled across the Minnesota Office of Higher Education affordability model. I thought this was just very interesting. I think when we all talk about affordability, we think about affordability at the moment somebody is going to cross the threshold into a college or university. And so we would refer to that as affordability at entry. Can I afford this education after high school in this moment that I'm pursuing it? And then I would say not only in that moment, but for the length of the program. So can I afford it for year one? If I'm doing a 2-year program, can I afford both years? If I'm pursuing a 4-year program, affordability will probably be a 4-year affordability at entry. Affordability measure number 2 and number 3, I would be tempted to combine those. Minnesota separates them, and I think that's really interesting. So lifetime affordability, they define as, does this education pay? And I would say, and how does it pay? If that's something that you're interested in pursuing, there is a wonderful report put out quite frequently by the College Board, and it's called Education Pays. And it talks about not only the advantages that someone with an education beyond high school has in earnings, but it also discusses what kind of unemployment they experience relative to someone who doesn't pursue education after high school. It talks about their civic life, talks about their health outcomes. So there are many aspects of education paying that go beyond monetary. So I think that's important too. Just one more thing on the previous slide. Measure number 3, affordability of repayment. I often think of that in terms of return on investment for people who have borrowed student loans. And so is it affordability? Is it affordable to you to pay back those student loans you may have incurred to pursue your education? Thanks, Sam. So just like everything in this world, there are lots of acronyms. And so when you see the term COA, I think you're tempted to think College of the Atlantic. But in terms of financial aid, we think of cost of attendance. And so cost of attendance is also sometimes referred to as a budget, but it's comprised of what we call direct and indirect costs. So currently tuition and fees are a direct cost no matter what school you're attending. And room and board, for example, may or may not be a direct cost. For instance, if I am living on campus at the University of Maine, room and board is a direct cost to me. But if I'm commuting to USM, then room and board is a budgeted amount because the financial aid office knows I'm going to incur those costs. I just don't happen to be paying them directly to the bursar's office. I might be paying a landlord instead. And so the same thing with books and supplies, transportation, and other miscellaneous expenses. All of those items are budgeted to come up with what's called a cost of attendance. And that's the cost for 1 year of attending that institution. So another great report that I would point you to from the College Board is called Trends in College Pricing and Student Aid. The information on this slide is national averages. So I want to try to be very careful to point out when I'm talking about Maine data versus when I'm talking about national data. The top bar represents public 2-year community college. The next bar represents a public 4-year in-state tuition. The third bar down represents a public 4-year, but for someone who is attending from out of state. So they're paying a higher premium because they are not an in-state resident. And then last is the private not-for-profit 4-year average. Again, I looked at our costs within Maine, and our schools are very near to these national averages. Some are a little higher and some are a little lower, but there are not many outliers. Having said that, if we move to the next slide, I don't think we can skip talking about cost of attendance without talking about schools that are significantly more expensive. And in Maine, those three schools are Bates, Bowdoin, and Colby. And I probably shouldn't even use the word expensive based on how I was defining it earlier, right? Expensive isn't necessarily unaffordable. But these are schools that have higher costs, but they're also very well endowed colleges, and they meet the full demonstrated financial need of their students who apply for financial aid. So again, very similar to the type of institution I was fortunate enough to attend. Because of financial aid, although it was expensive, it was affordable. This chart just shows the average over the last 20 years in growth of tuition. The only line that's missing, so you see 3 lines that correspond to the bars that we had looked at previously. The only one that's missing is that out-of-state student attending a public institution. So the top line are the private, not-for-profit 4-year. The dark blue is the 4-year public, and the lighter blue is the 2-year public. And again, these are national, and it's to show you the growth over the last 20 years of tuition and fees. I'm not going to go into detail on this slide because I actually do believe this is represented later on in one of our other presentations that are very specific to the University of Maine system. But this is, and the Maine Community College system, but this is our 2-year public institutions, and these are all the states. The orange bar represents the United States. I put a little green arrow in there so you could see Maine. If you look to the far right, you'll see Vermont is kind of winning the day as far as the highest tuition and fees, but New Hampshire and Mass are not far behind, just a few bars to the left. And then the chart on the bottom talks about that growth in inflation adjusted and the percent of growth over 5 years. And again, this slide's going to be talked about, I believe, in more detail. So we'll jump to the next one. Same chart, but this is for the 4-year publics. And again, you can see this one, this actually does show you the out-of-state premium. So the dark blue represents an in-state student's tuition and fees. The orange on top of that represents the premium that an out-of-state student is paying to attend that in-state 4-year school. And then I've put a green arrow so you can easily find Maine. And then at the same time, we also see the percentage increase over 5 years in inflation adjusted dollars. So net price. Net price has a whole new meaning in higher education, probably these last 10 years. But net price is the amount a student pays for a single year of their education after high school, after subtracting grants and scholarships. So net price does not include any student loans a student might be eligible for, or any federal work study or institutional work study. That type of financial assistance is called self-help. But grants and scholarships are often referred to as gift aid. So net price is what you'll pay after grants and scholarships. Schools are required to have a net price calculator on their website. And basically that allows a family or a student to go to the school's website to put in very specific information about their own circumstances. It's not filling out a FAFSA all over again, I can tell you that. But it is putting in some key elements of their financial information for that school to compare to what they do when they make financial aid awards and provide that student an estimated net price. And that's a really important tool for students and families to use as they begin the process of putting together a list of the types of schools they want to look at for that student's education after high school. So we tell people in our college access work to focus on net price, not sticker price. So many more decades ago than I want to admit, if my family had looked at the sticker price of the institution that I was accepted to, I never would have attended. Net price didn't exist back then, but nowadays we would say, look at the net price because an expensive school might still be an affordable school to you. So we really work very closely with our families and students to make sure they do that. Average net price by income is a really great data point for any student to understand about a college that they're looking at, and that is published at the College Navigator website by institution. So I would encourage any of you that are interested in diving in a little deeper to look up any school that you're curious about, and you can actually see the average net price by different income bands, and that tells you a lot about the institution and what they're able to afford for financial aid. And along with that, we often will encourage people to understand percent of need met. And that basically means what percent of your demonstrated financial need is the school able to cover in financial aid. Now, for many people, we do a very, much longer in-depth presentation, but I'll tell you very quickly, cost of attendance minus the expected family contribution, which is a number that's calculated when a family fills out the free application for federal student aid. That equals their demonstrated financial need. So cost of attendance minus the expected family contribution is the need. And then if you look at Big Future, which is a great website for the College Board, you can actually go in there and see what percent of need a specific institution meets. The example I gave you was Thomas College, because it was a nice one that I could find pretty quickly, and I wanted you to have one that you could access, but you could do that for any school on that website. Oh, great, thank you. If you scroll down a little bit, we should see 85% of need met. There you go. Distribution details, there you go. So you should be able to do that for any school in Maine. Thanks, Sam, that was great. So college cost as a percent of income, it's always a little nerve-wracking when you use someone's data and the person who published the data is sitting on the presentation with you. So this is a piece of data that comes from the Education Indicators Report from Jason Judd's group. And so I thank him very much. I know that they are in the process of retooling this percent, so it's disaggregated by public 4-year, public 2-year, private 4-year. So this is a blended percent, and it shows you just that the trajectory is going in the right direction between 2013 and 2018. And of course, the goal being to close the gap between Maine and the rest of New England. So I do think this is really interesting. We love the Education Indicators Report, so I wanted to make sure we included that as well. And it's another great way to look at cost of education as a percent of income. Average student loan indebtedness in Maine. I have sort of a funny story to tell you. I think I emailed this presentation to Sam on Monday night, maybe at 6 o'clock. Today, I went into the website, the Institute for College Access and Success, and this data that I gathered for the class of 2019 and the class of 2020 had already been published in the last 48 hours. So I will tell you, if you go out to this website, you'll already see updated information. The class of 2020, the average indebtedness is just a little bit lower, and the percent of graduates is also just a little bit lower. I would say that obviously 2020 isn't going to tell us that there's a trend, because we know that the world is going to be very different for the class of 2021 and the class of 2022 because of the pandemic. But this is a website that we will often go to when we look at average indebtedness. For Maine, you can see nationally where other states fall out as well. I will say that institutions aren't required to report, so you don't see all Maine institutions. And I think that's an important thing to understand about this website, but again, worth going to. And then another piece of information from the Education Indicators Report, which is average student loan debt as a percent of income. This percent is calculated looking at the annual average student loan debt compared to income. And again, moving in the right direction between 2013 and 2018, with the goal being to close the gap between Maine and the rest of New England. These are average student loan indebtedness for public 4-year institutions. Again, you'll see much more specific data in the presentations that come after me. I would say that if you're going to look at this trends in college pricing report, I would focus on the orange bar and not the blue bar, because that just tells you the individual average debt versus the average debt spread out among all degree recipients in a given class. And so I think when we think of college affordability, we're really thinking about how individuals are affected. And so I personally would I would stay focused on the orange bar. And then you see the same for nonprofit four-year institutions. For 2019-2020, the average individual indebtedness was 33.6, and that's right in line with where Maine is. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be having the commission and talking about every way possible to get that average student loan debt to be lower for families and for students. I do like to share this slide because I do think it's fascinating. We hear a lot of information in the media about six-figure student loan debt. That is a real thing, but I do think it's important to look at the distribution of that debt, and the College Board does a really good job with that. So if you look at the total number or the total percent of students who have over $100,000 worth of debt, that's actually 7% of all borrowers. But if you look at the total dollars that represents, that's 37%. I think what this is telling us is that you're really looking at a smaller percent of people that have that much higher debt, and you're looking at people who are pursuing advanced degrees. It doesn't mean that this isn't something that's important and should be on our radar, but I do think that this chart is very, very good information that helps us put the average indebtedness into perspective. Again, by dollar amount and by number of borrowers affected. So Maine State Grant, again, I don't want to belabor lots of things. Maine State Grant, so very fortunate. It's a program that enjoys a lot of support across the legislature, and we're always so very grateful. For the upcoming year, we have about $26,500,000 in appropriated funds. That's for both our traditional learners and our adult learners. For the first time, we were able to bump our award to $2,500 for a full-time student, $1,250 for part-time. That means more than 6 credit hours. A 7,000 EFC, basically what that means when I was telling you about the FAFSA and a calculated EFC, we take that expected family contribution and we use that number as a threshold to help us prioritize who will get Maine State Grant. Because as we know, as wonderful as 26.5 is, it's not an unlimited pool of funds. And so we really are trying to make sure that our Maine State Grant is going to our neediest students. And I will say for May 1, and this is a result of the pandemic, so far we actually have lifted our May 1 deadline. So right now we have no deadline. We are still okay. We still have funds available. But the goal was to help as many students as possible, recognizing that their plans were possibly quite up in the air as a result of the pandemic. So that's very different for 21-22. We will approach 22-23 similarly. We will start with the May 1 deadline. We will monitor our Fafsa completions. But if it looks like it's the right thing to do to lift that deadline to help as many students as possible, and we have the funds to do it, then we will do so. So just an FYI. So FAFSA completion in the pandemic. FAFSA completion for students attending this academic year, 21-22, compared to the previous year, 2021, we are down about 5% overall, and our Pell eligible applicants are down about 8.8%, so nearly 9%. The reason we say Pell eligible, Pell is a federal grant and it goes to our neediest students. And so we often are asked by many people, including the legislature, well, what's the income cutoff for low income or for Pell eligible? Well, there is no income cutoff because there are a lot of elements that go into calculating an EFC. But if somebody's Pell eligible, that's probably our best placeholder, our best stand-in for indicating low income. So these are our neediest students. And so this is not comforting data. Our neediest students are ruling themselves out because they're not filing the FAFSA, and they didn't this year. We obviously see the decline as being related to the pandemic, families dealing with what was right in front of them as the pandemic unfolded. The disruption to in-person learning, I think, took a toll. We really rely on our school counselors to nudge students along to complete their FAFSA. And when that wasn't happening, it had an impact. We certainly know that students were not sure about what the future would look like, and that may have stopped people, especially when it came to affordability. They really wanted to take their time. And then last but not least, we know that many families have experienced some kind of financial impact because of the pandemic. For the current year, we operate in very odd years. People are currently filling out the FAFSA for next fall, October, next September. So we call this our 22-23 FAFSAs that are being filed now. There have been challenges now with the technology, so that's unfortunate. So we are seeing an initial dip in FAFSA filing, but we're doing everything in our power as a college access team to make sure we're helping families. We actually are holding in-person and virtual FAFSA completion sessions with our staff. We're doing one-on-one FAFSA completion assistance in a virtual setting with our college access counselors. We've implemented a texting campaign for high school seniors, high school juniors, as well as parents and school counselors. And we've started a Facebook group for parents and college access professionals where they can come and ask us any question they want, and especially with the technology issues, that Facebook page has actually been getting a lot of great information out. I will say that. So our college access team, we've been, obviously we live, eat, sleep, breathe college affordability for our Maine families. But one thing that we really felt we needed to add to our toolbox, if you will, was how to talk about college affordability from the student and the family perspective. So what tips could we give families of the levers that they could pull that would help with college affordability, right? So there's only so many things within our control. What are the things that we could help families think about when it came to affordability? And so we put together what we called the path to affording higher education, and really trying to encourage family to think of education or affording education as a piecemeal approach. There are a lot of different pieces here. So saving is really important. Getting fit, and we say getting fit, we mean financially fit. So if you have a sophomore in high school or a freshman in high school, and you just finished paying off your car, it's very tempting to take on a new expense, but could you not take on that expense? Or are there some bills or debts you could clean up in the next few years before that child moves on to their first year of education? So when we say get fit, we're thinking, examine your budget. What could you do over these next 2, 3, 12 months, 2, 3 years, 12 months, whatever time frame you have. Build a list of affordable schools. Don't focus on sticker price, focus on net price, but build a list of affordable schools all the same. And that would include also having conversations with your student. It's much more difficult to have a conversation about what the family can afford when you're sitting in a financial aid office and you've already fallen in love with a campus versus really having that discussion upfront before the college search or the search starts for your educational location. And then last but not least, comparing financial aid offers. So financial aid offers can look different from different schools. And so we really want to encourage people to compare apples to apples. We do have some tools on our website that helps families do that. But we want to make sure that people understand that if you got more money from one institution out of state, but it's really just loaded up with student loans, that might not be as good a quality financial aid award as something that's in state that has less student loans. And then we understand this can be a really difficult conversation for families. So we wanted to create conversation starters so that people could really frame how they talk about affording education after high school and really putting together a plan with everyone having a clear understanding. So FAME's financial education work, we are in the midst of expanding our financial education efforts. The FAME board has approved our ability to do that. We're very excited. This initiative is really meant to help Mainers of all ages facilitate financial stability. We want to encourage a culture that embraces lifelong learning. So it's not just about graduating high school and going on to education. It could be about retraining or retooling your own skills. It could be about adults completing their degree. It could be about our veterans coming home and re-entering civilian life. We also want to make sure that we focus on the multiple pathways toward workforce development and education and training. And we specifically really want to look at the 40% of people that graduate from high school but don't complete the FAFSA, and they don't go on to do any formal education or training program or apprentice program or military. So how can we get a message to those 40% that really resonates with them? And then, of course, we want to support the 10-year economic goal of increasing the percentage of the workforce with a credential beyond high school. So our financial education efforts are really going to be focused in those areas, including encouraging families to save early. And that's another really important aspect of the affordability puzzle. So last but not least, a good segue into education savings. We are the administrator of the Next Gen 529 program. We're very fortunate to work with the Alphond Scholarship Foundation with the Alphond grant. And then in addition to the Alphond grant, which awards $500 to every baby born a Maine resident after 2013, We also have our Maine matching grants. And so the Alphon grant really helps families with eligible children for the grant get a start. And then the Maine matching grants are really intended to encourage people to make ongoing contributions. So that's a 30% match on their contributions made annually into a 529, into the Next Gen 529 account, up to a maximum of $300. And how can we get the message out to families with younger children earlier and earlier and help bust the myth that saving for college hurts your financial aid eligibility? It doesn't. So what are all those things we can do to help families pull the levers that are within their control for college affordability, which is really understanding the return on investment when it comes to borrowing, understanding the return on investment and the planning when it comes for saving. There are so many things that we think we can help families do that will help empower them. So that's what we've got to say from FAME, high level, but I look forward to hearing what everyone else has to say.
Thank you so much, Martha. That was an incredible presentation and a lot of really incredible assets and tools to look at. And I have to say, I really love the conversation starter portion that you highlighted. I think that's really, really useful and great to see. Questions? I see Representative Crockett.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, Martha, that was an incredible presentation. Thank you so much. I learned a ton, and I thought I knew this stuff pretty well. And the thing that struck me more than anything, the toolbox that we have is so impressive. But our opportunity is just to get that word out to folks, as early as possible. Just to follow up on something Senator Daughtry said earlier, the fact that we have guidance counselors as part of this commission, because I always try to put myself in the shoes of the family. And sadly, a lot of them don't even start thinking about college until it's late in the game. And then their instincts say, oh, I must have to talk to my high school counselor. And they don't necessarily know how to find all this great information. So that was awesome. And I appreciate you presenting that.
Thank you. I appreciate the feedback. It's very helpful. And we probably could go on and do many more presentations, but any questions, feel free to direct them my way.
It's definitely the right group for that as well. I have a question from Colleen.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Daughtry. And Martha, again, echoing everyone's appreciation and congratulations on a great presentation. You covered a lot of territory very, very quickly. The one piece that didn't really come up here, but I think is really important for the work we're about to do is the context of the pandemic. I know you talked about that a little bit in terms of the Fafsa completion rates and the impact there, but I think that there are other factors in play there as well. You mentioned a number of them. I think there are some other factors that are just really important for us to keep in mind. One of them would be the availability of work and higher wages right now that for students who might not have been traditionally college bound. They're looking for something they need right now to meet their own needs or their family needs. And there are opportunities with that in terms of particularly thinking about certifications and other upskill opportunities that would still work, identify those students and work with them to get some kind of certificate or training, maybe even leading towards a degree that would then over time increase the skills. But I think that's a shift in this current moment that I think is important for us to be aware of. And the other thing I think even more so is, and again, I think you touched on this very briefly, but I just wanted to highlight it, is the impact of the pandemic on really needing to make the case all over again about the value for higher ed, right? So you referred to the study that was in there. A lot of us are familiar with the data, but that kind of data is not necessarily convincing to, again, a lot of families who don't have that kind of inherent understanding or experience even with higher ed and the difference that it makes, again, higher ed in all the forms. And I think there's been so much work, and we've talked about this in other settings and with other committees and Maine Spark efforts and things like that, that there is so much work has been done over the last 10 years to reach a group of students who might not historically have continued education after high school and to get them to the point of taking that step. And then that evaporated almost overnight with the pandemic, right? And it's not going to come back quickly or easily. And so I think just thinking through, new strategies to do that. I know that this commission is about affordability and completion, but you got to have the pipeline in place and they have to understand the affordability and the relevance of the education they might want to get to be motivated to pursue it and then to complete it. So I just think that those are, that contextual piece is really, really critical for this work right now. And I think it's probably the biggest distinction between the work of this commission and the one in 2014 is taking all that into account. So I just wanted to surface that. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. And I'll jump in real quick before tossing it back to you, Martha, is that this morning, I mean, I think all week leading up to this, the thing I keep coming back to is the sort of change with the pandemic. And I know when the education committee, when we were discussing this commission, one of the things that we did want to discuss was the pipeline, but how much there's sort of a block in that pipeline now, and what does it look like? And even not just, the availability of higher wage and work opportunities, but also just the fear of, do you take on this, massive life change when you're not sure if it could put you and your family at physical, risk of contracting this virus, and what does that mean for future generations? And I have to say, I know this is, the alarm bells are being risen, but the real decline in Pell Grant students and just, we're seeing the folks who probably can least afford to jump out of that pipeline are probably the ones who are being the most impacted. And then the families with means and the ability to navigate this in any situation are the ones who are going to, probably be able to weather this a little bit better. So I think that's sort of our interim charge to all of us to sort of keep that in mind, even though it's not in the title as well. So thank you for highlighting that. Martha?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond very quickly. So as part of our financial education expansion efforts, we're really pleased we're exploring working actually with a behavioral science firm to really examine the messaging we have about pursuing education after high school, because we realize that to Colleen's point, there are people, especially now with the pandemic, for whom that message isn't resonating. And so how do we frame what we're saying and get people to engage, whether it's completing the FAFSA or in the case of getting younger families earlier and earlier to start saving. I will say I debated putting like what I call bonus content into the presentation, but another aspect of affordability I think everyone should be aware of, there are 42 million student loan borrowers who are about to go into repayment after January 31st. So there's been a long hiatus related to the pandemic, and everyone's very grateful that they've had that hiatus. But the Finance Authority of Maine is gearing up to do an information campaign to help borrowers prepare so that on top of everything that we've all been experiencing, that aspect of affordability for people who have already finished, or maybe they didn't finish, but they have student loan debt, they will be facing that as well. So
it's kind of a perfect storm.
Mm-hmm.
President Dagler, did I see your?
You did, Senator Daughtry. Thank you. First of all, I'll echo the theme of an excellent presentation by Martha, although I've become used to that. And then really sort of lever Colleen's comments, both from the standpoint of the change or the amplification that's taken place during the pandemic, but some residual factors as well, and then the underlying the underlying point. The residual factors are there also changing attitudes, especially among younger adults, around education, around work, and factor those things into the conversation. And then really begin to pull back and understand that we've been talking about the aspiration side of this conversation for dozens of years. And a question is, how much have we really moved the needle? We've improved it some, we have. But we still have in the neighborhood of 40% of high school students who are choosing not to go on. And what might be helpful for us is if we hear today's presentations and then take a step back and ask ourselves, where do we go with this, and sort of structure the conversation? Because there is a part of affordability and completion that are indelibly connected. The ability to afford an education is obviously paramount. But secondly, just take the completion aspect as an independent conversation and ask ourselves, and here Fame's work with a behavioral scientist could become very influential to us, but ask ourselves, why are young people, especially low-income young people, choosing not to go on in higher education and creating different routes for themselves, and how might we address those concerns? Because in some cases it is about money. In some cases, it is about the perception of money. And to that extent, I really appreciate Martha's characterization of differentiating expense of a college and the affordability of a college. Because there are students in this state that can go to Harvard or to Bates, which I think was the most expensive school that Martha put up, for less than they can go to community college, just because of meeting need. But then there's also that notion of a student's drive to go to college, and what is impeding them. What is convincing them that they shouldn't or that they don't need to go to college? So, just sort of some comments for us to sort of think about as we look forward. And really, you may hear me say this early and often. It is about money, but it's not just about money.
Absolutely. And one thing that just sort of reminded me of that is not necessarily part of our charge, but is something that I've sort of had in the back of my head from my work with the New England Board of Higher Education is, as this landscape is changing, one of the things we knew before the pandemic started is about the survivability of colleges throughout our region. And, for the larger, well-established, endowed schools, they're going to be able to weather this a little bit easier. And what does this mean for sort of the smaller privates, as well as, just trying to make sure in a hard economic, period that we're supporting our students through, universal measures like the Maine State Grant, but also making sure our public institutions are getting the state resources they need to be able to compete. So it's sort of, that combination of the deck was stacked a little bit rough for everyone going into it on all different sides, whether, it's our students or our institutions. So that's another thing I think to sort of keep with us. Looking at the time, we have just about 2 more minutes before we're scheduled to go on to the next presentation. So any more questions for Martha before we move on? Seeing none, once again, thank you, Martha. That was an incredible presentation. And just to remind everyone, especially for those who are watching on YouTube, you can access this on our website as well. We'll make sure everyone has those slides. So thank you. And up next, moving on to our next presentation, we're going to be having UMS Vice Chancellor for Finance Administration, Ryan Lowe, and our own commission member. I'm going to try it this time and see if I get it right. Robert Placido? Almost.
Placido. Thank you.
And take it away.
Okay, well, thank you. As you noted, my name is Ryan Lowe. I'm the Vice Chancellor for Finance and Administration for the system, and was a member of the original commission. And I'm going to split up this presentation with Robert, so I will get things started, and then at about halfway through the presentation, Robert will take over, and then we'll both be happy to answer any questions. So let's fire right along, Sam. So certainly thought it made sense to start with a profile of a typical, if there is such a thing, UMS student. Again, I won't read the charts for you, but about 3/4 of our students are in-state. The percentage of out-of-state has grown by a few percentage points over the course of the last decade or so, as individual campuses have looked for strategies to backfill the decline in in-state students. It's grown, as you would expect, mostly at Orono, as well as Portland. About 66% of our students are full-time, as you would expect, and like everything I'm going to say today, that varies dramatically by campus. So more full-time, as you would expect, at campuses like Orono and Farmington, a higher percentage of part-time students at USM and UMA for us. About 40% are first gen. 50% are in that traditional 18 to 21 age category. The other 50% are a mix from 22 to 102. Race and ethnicity, again, you can see the data on the charts, varies greatly depending on the campus that you're on. The greatest diversity, as you would expect, is at the USM campus. Go on to the next one, Sam. So this is a chart that tracks the state and student share of the UMS E&G operating budget. So E&G being education in general, that's the portion of our budget that's made up of tuition, fees, and state appropriation. So again, as you can see here as well as I can, in the 70s through the late 90s, state support covered about at least 60% of our costs, topping out at about 72% in the late 80s. The state budget challenges that several of us on the call lived through in the 2000s continued to erode that support right around the 2007, 2008. So when we started getting into the recession, you see the lines cross. And state support since then has hovered somewhere in that 41 to 42%. Whenever I talk about this chart and I talk about this one with our trustees, I always like to acknowledge, this is absolutely not a criticism of state support. Several of you know I was actually in charge of the state budget during a lot of that window where things were going in the other direction. In fact, we've had we had a steady decade or so of flat support, and then in recent years we've had 3% increases in 3 of the last 4 years. So while we would love to see consistent increases, I know what some of our colleagues in other states have done. So I never like to put this chart up and have anyone assume that it's a criticism. I know as well as anyone the circumstances and challenges that the state has faced. So this is a chart that we started including in our budget presentations several years ago, and you saw it in the FAME version of it in the FAME presentation earlier, to allow us to track inflation-adjusted tuition increases at the system level against other states. And so for us, as noted on the chart, we have froze tuition 7 times since 2012. And just as important as that is that we implemented our own policy where we limited any tuition increases to no more than the consumer price index as forecasted by the state's consensus economic forecasting committee. I think that's a big deal. We haven't spent a lot of time talking about it, but I know when I came into the system in 2010 from state government, and if I looked back at the 5 previous budgets or so for UMS, we had consistently tuition increases of 8, 9, 10, 12%. It was really, you wait and you see what the state gives you. If you don't get what you want, then figure out what the cost of that tuition increase is going to be. Our trustees appropriately decided that was not the right direction that we should be moving in. And so we adopted this policy around CPI after freezing tuition from 2012 through 2017. We again froze tuition in this fiscal year that we are in. We have been tracking tuition as a percentage of per capita income at the system since about 2008. It's one of the original KPIs that our board developed to track a number of years ago. And so again, what you see here probably is no surprise given the number of years that we've frozen tuition. And again, when we've increased it, it's only been in the 2 to 2.5% range. So you can see starting in 2013, we were about 18% of the average per capita income in Maine. That has dropped steadily since then, bottoming out at about 14.5% in 2020. So this simply shows you annual tuition and fees at each of our campuses, along with room and board, as well as in-state tuition discount. I'll just note a couple of things on here. A few years ago, we did sync up our tuition policy so that we put each of our campuses into one of 3 tiers. We always struggle with what the right word is because we don't want to imply that if you're at a lower tier, it's lower quality. But we just recognize that, the tuition to support the academic mission at the University of Maine is going to be more expensive than it is at Fort Kent. That's just a reality. So we developed three tuition tier levels. One at the University of Maine, standalone in its own tier, where we tended to look at what was going on with other New England flagships. We had a second tier, which was Farmington and the University of Southern Maine. So they have the same per credit hour charges. It ends up being just a little bit different because of the number of credit hours that students at Farmington take, but those are reflected. Those are the same. And then the third tier that we have is at Augusta, Machias, Fort Kent, and Presque Isle, and you can see those are in that $73.50 range. A little different at Machias as we kind of work through this transition with this partnership with the University of Maine, but it gives you a flavor of how we do that. So again, if we increase tuition by 2% at Farmington, we would obviously do the same thing at USM. We keep those on a similar path. Fees, again, they're fairly self-explanatory. We've done a lot of work over the last couple of years to really try to increase the transparency around that with our students. Room and board charges are noted, and then in-state tuition discount. If we want to get into more detail, I think I'd probably defer to Robert. But we spent a lot of time looking at what that discount rate was that we were discounting tuition for our in-state students. It's a little bit all over the place, in-state and out-of-state. We needed to come up with a consistent definition because definitions of discount rates can also be all over the place. But this was really our first time kind of digging in and trying to understand that and actually having the information at our fingertips. So then we could start thinking about what we do with that information and whether we want to look at any policy changes. And so just a couple of points, and I'm going to transition this back over to Robert. As I noted, we do know that our tuition rates fare very competitively with our peers. We have each of our campuses has a set of peer institutions that we have developed over the last several years. For the University of Maine, in addition to those peers, we have the other New England flagships to compare ourselves against. And going back a number of years, this has been a trend. It was true when I was the CFO there. Tuition, fees, room and board are consistently lower at the University of Maine, including the total cost of attendance, than they are at any other flagship in New England. I think the next chart is Robert. So let me just wrap up my piece with a comment because I want to be transparent about this. Robert's going to talk in a little bit about some of the figures around scholarship increases that we have implemented at our campuses. But I wanted to make sure that I was clear, at least in my part, that the increase in scholarship dollars, the reduction in loans, they have come at a cost. And for the University of Maine system, that cost has been infrastructure investments. And so, when you're looking at flat and declining revenue bases, which I think we have been since I've been at the system, we know what the percentage of Maine students, what the demographics look like. And so for us, when enrollment, only goes down by a couple of percentage points, it really feels like a victory. And so if you've got fewer students, you've got flat state support, and you've probably got flat tuition, then your revenue base is going to be smaller than it was in the previous year. And typically our institutions, and I suspect it's the same for most higher ed institutions, we're people heavy. We're 70 to 85% people on a lot of our campuses. If any of you have done budgets before, you know that people costs always go up. Even if you're not handing out raises, health insurance is going up, workers' comp is going up. And so you constantly have have this expense base that is going up and a revenue base that is flat. And so when you push more money into scholarships, when you don't have consistent tuition increases, something has to give. And again, for us, that has been infrastructure investments. And so I think I saw the footnote Sam included on one of the charts. We've got over $1 billion in deferred maintenance across the system. This is a telling statistic. 77% of the residence halls in the University of Maine system have not been renovated since 1971, meaningfully renovated. That is a staggering number. It's more than 50% of our buildings system-wide haven't been meaningfully renovated since the 70s. And that's the other half of this challenge. We'd love to plow more and more and more money into this, but it ends up being a balancing act. And so I'm very proud of the efforts we've done and the statistics that Robert will talk about and the resources that we've put behind this. But I also want to acknowledge it hasn't been easy.
Thank you, Ryan. And this is a perfect transition on this slide. I appreciate all the comments you made, so I won't add too much here other than to say my words today won't carry as much meaning as what this chart conveys, is that we take holding our costs down very seriously. You can see, that is a dramatic drop in the percent of loans. And that doesn't happen without great intention behind it. So I frame that because we work very hard to reduce our direct costs, and Martha did a marvelous job in her presentation talking about in depth these topics. Where I would add to that conversation is, besides, and I think it was great, the comments that happened after her presentation started to drift in this perspective, is that the cost is one side of it. What I wanted to express is that affordability is not just about cost and direct costs, but it's the social, emotional, and all the other barriers that go along with it. As I was preparing for this today, we've been going to our campuses, listening to tours, each of 7 campuses. We were at Machias the other day, and we had a wonderful presentation from the Family Futures Down East partners. So we have, it reminded me how many community advocates we have working with our students, our poorest students, to make college an opportunity, to open up the choice, to make it more accessible. And it occurred to me that there are so many indirect costs or barriers that it would be nice if this group could work to add into our end result. For example, childcare for our poorest students tends to be an issue, and we could advocate for more funding for childcare. But in many of our communities, childcare just is not an option; it's not available. So it's not just about having the funding; it's about all of the other wraparound services. The poorest students tend to have emotional, they come from abusive situations and all kinds of issues that I think everyone on this group is aware of. But if we want to break those cycles of poverty in those communities, we should address that and maybe frame it in some other language than just affordability. But I like that Martha framed it as, being affordable is a perspective. And so the other aspect, so we haven't gotten to know each other, many of us. My background is in data science, particularly for education data. And I do have lots of issues with the measures that nationally we have been accustomed to talking about. So hopefully you all will bear with me on some of these things. But I firmly believe that if our measures are wrong, our results will never be right. And so I'll present the background issues with a lot of this data as a part of being a member to the committee, and we can do we can act on that accordingly. But for debt, and if we can move on to the next slide, Sam. Again, this just illustrates what we've just talked about, so I won't belabor the point, but you can see the graph over time, that the top bar being loans, the bar below it, and which you can barely see is green, is scholarships going way up, loans going way down. So a lot more commitment from the institutions to get the cost of attendance to be affordable for our students. Go on to the next one. So this is where I'll add a bit of comment about the data. Debt loads, a few things about debt, and Martha had some really good figures too, so we won't spend a ton of time on this, but I wanted to talk about the problems with debt. First of all, Martha mentioned that not all institutions publish a debt number. The number that they publish can be different in the definition used, but most use, it's called the CDS or Common Data Set nationally. And when they do participate in that debt doesn't include, when you're talking about an average, it doesn't include students who have zero debt. And so lots of states, including Maine, have had a number of efforts over the years to educate parents on and give them opportunities to save in ways that they would be prepared to pay for their students. And so we have a much higher percentage of students with zero debt, but they're not included in the average. So in other words, we could get to a point where there's only one student who has $40,000 in debt, and that would be our average debt. So that's just a sort of silly measure. I'll give you a couple of data points to illustrate this. So University of North Texas, 58% of their students no longer have debt. The University of Maine has been working on this. Almost 40% of their students no longer have debt, and that's total enrolled students. 30% of their students who graduate without debt. Yet that doesn't reduce. So that's an amazing effort that many people are responsible for, but it's not included. You won't see the average debt reduced by that because they're not included. The other thing I would say about debt is that on the downside is it doesn't include all debt. Now, parents now have the ability to take out student loans on their students' behalf, and that isn't recorded. We don't have access to that information as institutions. So we're not seeing a full picture of total family debt just on the student side. And not in all cases, so I'll say it that way. The other aspect of this is that debt inherently, and I think we've covered this a bit, but debt inherently isn't bad. Bad debt is bad. So it's about a total picture of return on the student's future value. So states, and Martha mentioned Minnesota, I'll mention Texas because I'm more familiar with them. They adopted measures that include better accountability in that you're looking at wages, future earnings according to the debt or related to the debt that's being taken out. So if we have a teacher who takes out $40,000 in debt and they're only going to make $28,000 when they graduate, that's a poorer return than an engineering student that takes $40,000 in debt and they get out in their first year and make $100,000. So they have come up with measures that I think the committee should consider where there is an actual return ratio being applied to that debt. And I think that we would fare fairly well when we start to look at that. I will, and again, I'll go through the rest of my slides pretty quickly here. But the community college leadership, Janet's on the call here, and my group have successfully completed an MOU with the federal census group to for the first time, we're going to have national data on our student graduate wages And that's what that link there is in your chat. If you'd like to look at that, and I'll share that with the group later. One of the struggles we have had is finding out the outcomes. So we have Maine Earns, they're great partners with us, but that's only for people who stay and work in Maine. So all of the graduates who leave and work in other parts of the country, we had no way of knowing how much they're earning to understand what our outcomes are. But we do now, and that measure provides that. So moving on, we have a number of initiatives. We already talked about some of these, but we have the Promise programs where Pell eligible students, essentially we meet that last bit of need, so our poorest students can come for virtually free of direct costs. So we're still working on those other things. We have adult degree completion scholarships. So we have the worst thing that can happen to an adult is that they have stranded credits. They've been going to college, they stop out, and they have all this debt with no credential of value to help them earn more. And so we have programs being developed to help them complete. Of course, Presque Isle, I think one thing that's come up in the past, we have competency-based programs that make that time to degree even faster, very innovative new type of degree that you'd be happy to hear solely uses electronic resources. So textbooks are free, and we could talk about that more later. And Sam, go to the next slide. So we could spend a lot of time talking about these 6-year and first-year completion numbers, and I hope to educate the committee on these. But we wanted to offer what our completion rates are compared to the rest of the country, and this is 6-year graduation for undergraduates. But keep in mind, this is first time. These are the first time in college traditional students coming out of high school. That is for UMA. The reason they're so low there, they had 70 students who fit that particular definition. Their mission is to serve adults, non-traditional students. So you're not ever going to see that number be high for an institution like that. And I can show you the type of measures that we're using to hold them accountable later. Underneath there, each of the bars, and Sam is hovering over that. Notice that UMaine says 94, UMA says 100, UMFK says 99. It might be a surprise to you that those numbers are the percent of students that we accept to our institutions. We are an open public school system, more so than I am familiar with working for. If a student applies and they meet very minimum standards, we want to get them into one of our institutions and get them into a pathway that will make them successful. So in terms of accessibility, we're very accessible. Next slide. So we talked in the comments a bit about attracting a student's attention to the value of college. There could be no better example than our early college program. Appreciate all of the support that the state has given us on this, and the partnership that the community college has with us on this is phenomenal. If you didn't know, we partnered to create a student system that we both share, and that has greatly improved that program and increased the number of students that have enrolled in that. And in fact, we could double the amount of participation in this program if funding was available. The message I would give here for early college is students who participate in early college complete at much higher rates, and you can see in the next slide here, much higher rates than students without the early college. You can see the orange being no early college and the blue being with early college. So giving them the opportunity to have that experience come in builds confidence, builds skills. They're developmentally ready for college, and you can see the proof there that it is worth your investment for sure. Next slide. So beyond being affordable, we talked about keeping them so that they get a credential of value. And so success is an important aspect of this. And I saw we have a partner from the Harold L. Fund group with us. So appreciate all your support. And the big investment they've made in us. So we have $20 million set aside for student success and retention. And we've launched a number of efforts. And we could talk about that more. We have our own internal efforts like Think 30, which is a national successful program where students are encouraged to take 30 credits a year, therefore graduating them on time, getting them into jobs sooner, but also all of the other costs besides tuition, housing and transportation and all of those things really extend and increase the cost of education. So getting it done sooner is a key element for affordability. A program that the Chancellor launched 2 years ago now called Make the Grade, where students are allowed for free to retake courses that they have failed. And we've seen great success in retaining those students where normally if they fail those first year courses, they drop out and they don't come back. So there's some potential there, and we could talk about that more later. So I think I've left a couple of minutes for question, and we went through that quickly. I just wanted to say that I'm really excited to be with you all and a part of this group.
Thank you so much. And thank you for an amazing presentation and a really good snapshot. And I always find it, the one slide about highlighting how Maine's flagship campus is the most affordable one in the region, I think is always a good thing to come back to. Not that we don't have more work to do, but it's a good thing to keep in mind. Representative Crockett.
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. A couple of things highlight. I want to really thank Ryan, Mr. Lowe, just for highlighting, where the costs are going. I think so much of this debate is a result of just not being aware of the information and exactly, where the dollars are going. As we spoke, obviously, it kind of crushed me when you said some of the buildings hadn't been addressed since the 70s. I could probably say that's Chadbourne Hall at Maine, since it looks about the same as it did then. I had a question for Mr. Placido. What percentage of students that finish do it in 4 years versus 5 or 6, or are there numbers for even longer?
So it greatly depends on the program. For example, our engineering program is almost designed to be 5 years to get all of the experiential pieces in place. But nationally, that number is like 30%, and that's off the top of my head. But I'll bring that back to the group in detail.
Okay, Senator Daughtry, can I have a follow-up?
Of course.
Does anybody on this call is aware? I know federal student loans. I know traditionally are ratcheted up over the first 4 years of school. When a student goes into their 5th or 6th year, are they still eligible to receive federal student loans? Or are they dipping into personal loans if they need money?
I think Martha might have an answer as well. You're going to jump in.
There are aggregate student loan limits in the federal student loan program. So it's possible that a student would have some 5th year eligibility, but they will bump up against those aggregate limits. And so if that student is considered a traditional dependent student, then they are likely looking at private student loans or federal Parent Plus loans to help with additional years of schooling. Once they become a graduate student, they can tap into higher loan levels through the federal program. So they could be looking at federal parent loans, private student loans, as an undergrad, traditional dependent, independent, more doors open up, but higher debt levels.
And Representative Crockett, just want to draw attention to what Sam just put in the chat. The limit for federal loans are available by going to the studentaid.gov site. And you can dig down a little bit more into understanding the aid packages that are available through that.
Thank you.
Up next, I have Representative Roach.
Thank you. Just a one technical question on the fees. There's a significant difference. I was surprised that USM was near $2,000, where Maine was down around 400. Why is that much of a jump in fees in the same system? And I have another question, not a follow-up, but another question altogether. But if I can get that one out first.
Yeah, I'll invite Sam to help me out if she can remember the specifics. It's been a little while since we've done the budget presentation. So we can absolutely follow up and I can get you that information. Some of it tends to be just campus specific. So for instance, parking, as you would expect in Portland, tends to be more expensive for parking permits than it might be at a Fort Kent or Presque Isle, where it might be nothing. So that is some of it. It's not all of it. Some of our campuses have also, over the last few years, have started to try to roll some of those fees up into actual tuition, so that we're a little more transparent about that. But we can absolutely get you a breakdown. We have that. We put it together last year when the legislature was talking about fees, and our trustees have the same questions. So it's a good question. I know there's a good answer. I just can't remember what it is off the top of my head, so we'll get you that.
Oh, it looks like Sam might have been able to find it. Oh, here we go. Structure. I don't know, Sam or Ryan, if either of you would like to speak better, just have it up on the screen.
Okay, so yes, so that's the part that I'm remembering, that second bullet in the therefore piece. USM, it doesn't really talk about necessarily. If you look at the individual fees, for instance, at USM last year, and we had a similar conversation at Orono, that's all now coming back to me. It used to be, you might have 25 fees, and so it rolls over onto another page. We also had course fees, and so if you were taking a business course at the University of Maine, there might be a $25 add-on, and so now you take 5 courses, and now all of a sudden you've got like 15 fees on there. So last year, as part of our budget, one of the things that we did was at Orono, we collapsed those fees into tuition. At USM, we just collapsed the fees into a big fee. So instead of 25 fees, we collapsed it into one. And what we're doing, that was a pilot, really 2 ways to tackle this fee issue. One was the Orono way, you do it all at once and roll it into tuition. One was the USM one, which was more of a 2-step process. First, we're going to consolidate it, and then we're going to roll it into tuition. And so 2 different approaches. And next, as we start building the 23 budget, each of our campuses is going to have a similar conversation. And I don't know that all the fees will necessarily be rolled up into that tuition number, but we want to get away from 50 fees on a student's bill. It makes it really complex, and especially for first-gen students, when you get a bill and it's 7 pages long, what is this? I don't understand it. So we've got a little bit more information on that pilot program that we included in our budget presentation that I could give Robert and Sam for future discussions.
Thank you. My other question, and you guys have kind of touched on it, but it's something that I've heard a lot from teachers. I'm a teacher, so I've been in the building all day, and I was talking about this today, and it was interesting to hear. And I think you kind of touched on it a little bit, but the fact that, and I understand, my son went to Boston College, and I remember him saying there's a lot, he's a finance major, and he did fine, but he used to say, Dad, there's a lot of garbage courses I got to take to get this finance degree. And he didn't mean it as that came out. But I think if we could, one of the things I've always thought in education is if we could cut back on some of the things that we have to do, the hoop we have to jump through, And especially now with teachers being, I think I saw the rate for a UMaine system is incredibly low now, where it used to be very high that, teaching was a major. Some of the hoops we have to jump through in education in the 4 years and cut back the number of years, I think more and more people would be more interested in going to college. I mean, where it takes 4 years to get a degree in some things, I'm not sure that's worth it, and I think you're touching on that a little bit, maybe not enough in my, I like it sooner than later, but I think you are touching on that. Does anyone want to comment on that? And I already know the argument of a whole student. I get that piece. I'm not trying to, but I also think there's places where we could not take some courses and still get our teaching degree or our whatever degree.
May I?
Right ahead.
I mean, you may be surprised that I won't push back at all. I completely agree. And one of the things I brought with me 4 years ago, and we've been adopting and implementing ever since, is a concept of accelerated programs. So not just about time to degree for the traditional programs, but for the parent that's still going to work through all this, they can't do a 16-week course. They can't wait for fall to get in and all of those things. So 8-week compressed courses with the idea that they're going to get the material they need to get the credential they need as fast as they can at the most affordable price. So we have nursing programs, education programs, some business programs at UMPI, and those are all designed for that fast completion. Now, those students aren't going to get the dorm life, fraternity, all those sort of maturation that happens on campus, but that's not what they're looking for either. So we're trying to serve all those different constituents. The other thing I would say about the more traditional on-campus programs, we do, and maybe this is part of something that the commission recommends, we have to stop these or do a better job of advising students so they don't end up with 140 credit hours when they only need 120 to complete. And so that's something I would partner with you absolutely on.
I would, just to follow up on that, I would completely agree, and would say that there's definitely been a shift in the conversations, especially sort of on the national conferences I've been lucky enough to go to, and talking with different folks about what we need to do to make college more affordable. And there's been an increasing move to the fact that things don't have to be, I mean, we have this in K through 12 of like seat time, and that it's about getting things done and not necessarily about checking the box of were you present for X amount of hours. I don't know, President DeLucas, did you have your hand up? Did you want to add into that on the private side?
Sure, happy to. So I think a couple things there. One is the issue of fees, right? And we rolled our fees into tuition room and board several years ago for transparency for our traditional undergraduate students and especially the first generation families, so they could understand better what they're going to be charged. But we also rolled them in for our adult learners because for working adults who are getting reimbursed, they're being reimbursed typically just for tuition and not for the fees. So to put it all into a reimbursable category from an employer's perspective makes it easier for those students to handle the cost of the education. So there are multiple reasons to have fees rolled into one of the recognizable categories, in this case, tuition. So. And as far as the length of the program, there was a lot of discussion several years ago about three-year degrees, right? The challenge is that it's still 120 credits, no matter how you slice it, because of other reasons we could talk about. Schools did develop 3-year degree programs that would allow folks to do 120 credits in 3-year degrees. And there was not a lot of uptake among traditional age college students because their expectation is that they're going to spend 4 years, 8 semesters in college, and if they're student athletes, they have 8 semesters of NCAA eligibility, and all those things that are sort of have become naturalized about our sense of what college is, have driven us toward these that have kept us. I guess say not driven us, has kept us at that point. And I'm going to stop talking now because I'm going to get a chance to talk in a few minutes. And I'm going to talk about choice and the tremendous range of choices folks have for different reasons and multiple opportunities, but it's recognizing what those opportunities are. It's not a one-size-fits-all world, and choice is going to be a big factor in affordability because affordability, as was said earlier, is not the same price. So thank you.
Thank you. Colleen, I think you had your hand up next, followed by Representative Salisbury.
Thank you, Senator Daughtry. Just apropos of the conversation a minute ago around timing and pacing of things, I'd love to elevate the early college conversation to maybe dig into later on. In my experience with it, it's one of the best levers to pull around both affordability and completion. Years ago, early college used to be an opportunity that was available to the high-flying academic kids in high school who would kind of, run through what was available, and they wanted a chance to take some college classes for credit. Back when I was at the Mitchell Institute, was a time in Maine when it was broadly expanded at both the community college system and the university system, and we were involved in research and in some expansion pilot projects. And the data showed that, as Dr. Placido referred to earlier, that the college going rate and the completion rates both increased, particularly for young men, and even their high school grades improved as well. And so I think it's something really worth taking a look at. Anecdotally, I would say more recently in the last couple of years, what I've seen more of, and again, this is purely anecdotal, is students who are high flyers academically and are using the early college to experience and the credits that they earn to be able to complete college, a 4-year degree in 3 years, because that's of greater value to them. And all the conversation, a minute ago about the kind of traditional notions of what the college quote unquote experience is like, I think there are real shifts in that socially and culturally now. That early college is just a potential lever, I think, that can be something that is a good thing to explore further, both for students who might not be traditionally college bound and for whom that extra credit and time and confidence that comes from that early college experience can really move them towards completion, as well as the affordability piece, because it just cuts down the number of credits you're paying for. So I just wanted to surface that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think President Dagler, real quick, to do something in reference to that.
Specifically in reference to that, one of the things that I think would be very interesting and kind of essential for the committee to dial into, or the commission, I guess it is, dial into, is really what's happening in different demographic sectors. Because we're seeing a notion where there are significant divides, and the changes that are taking place are different, mostly among income levels of households and prior learning experience. So if parents have gone to college, that precipitates one sort of reaction. For first generation learners, it precipitates a very different reaction. And I think if Martha's on, I think that FAFSA completion, for example, for graduate schools is up, but FAFSA completions, as you've seen, for lower income families is down. And there's an increasing divide, even among early college students, around college attendance and around their perceptions and their beliefs about college attendance.
Definitely. And that's something we can also, that sort of belief and feelings towards pursuing post-secondary education, I think it's something that'll definitely come up in our later conversations as well. Representative Salisbury.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Madam Chair. Just really quickly, I think what you were just saying, President Dagler, is that right now, if we look at the reality of the world right now and what people and a lot of low-income families are looking at, like the basic survival of the world today, kind of takes college potential out of the mixture when we're talking about just the basic everyday living, where they're living, whether they have food, whether they have healthcare, whether they have childcare, whether they have, all of those things. And we have to keep in mind that I think, especially after this pandemic and the last few years, the loss of jobs and stuff like that is going to have a big impact on the next few years of people as they're regrouping and rebuilding their lives. And then it'll be interesting to see once the deadlines pass about the exceptions for people, paying on their loans and what that brings into effect, how people are going to react when that happens, when they have to start paying on their loans and people potentially aren't working. So it's definitely something that we have to in all the discussions, I think the reality of people's situations has to be taken into consideration. Certainly, that it's not just the fact that they might be a first generation person with the opportunity to go to college, but you adding into that the stark reality of what their lives might be. I just want to throw that out there. And the other thing, I can't agree more as far as having relevant classes. As a 53-year-old senior taking a linguistics class, that is literally the hardest class I've ever taken in my life. And I needed to graduate, and it's going to be tight. But I think, I think that in all the discussions and our talks and stuff, again, a reality of the situation of what the end goal is really important,
Agreed. And thank you, Representative Salisbury. And I actually had a comment. I had someone reach out about the commission, ask if there were, any students or anyone who had student debt on the commission. And I was pretty excited. I immediately thought of you, and I know a few others with student debt as well. And it's a good thing to keep in mind, the realities of what we're doing and, what shifted for everyone's, day-to-day life decisions outside of, post-secondary opportunities. Do we have any other questions? Like any good education policy meeting, we are already behind schedule. And because we're on Zoom, and I am very familiar with Zoom fatigue, I do want to make sure we take a quick break. Before we move to that though, any other questions? Okay, seeing no hands shooting up, we're going to take what will hopefully be an actual 5-minute break, not a legislative 5-minute break. Hopefully there's not halls you can all get lost in on the way to the bathroom and come back 20 minutes. But so just a reminder, because we are streaming live, please turn off your video and put yourself on mute. And I'll pop back on when 5 minutes are up, and we can start right back in. Go stretch. Okay, everyone, I think that puts us right at 5 minutes, or at least according to my timer. I'll wait to see everyone's video go back on. Everyone do make sure you get your arms moving. That. Okay, well, everyone's coming back. Just to let folks know, up next, we're going to be passing it back to President DeLugas to talk about sort of the MICA presentation on affordability and completion efforts. And then we'll be hearing from Maine Maritime and then from the Maine Community College System as well. And President DeLugas, if you're ready, we're ready for you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Senator Duffy. As you know, I'm Jim DeLugas, and as I said at the beginning, this is my 10th year as president of St. Joseph's College of Maine, and I'm currently serving as the president of the Maine Independent College Association, whose membership I'm representing today. We're going to approach this a little differently than the system did, because we're not a system. Our 11 members are very different, and so putting numbers together may not make as much sense in terms of averages. So we're going to tell stories. We've asked our member schools to send us information about their affordability and completion efforts, and we'll go through that. But I want to begin by saying that all of MICA's members are committed to providing excellent and affordable higher education to the residents of Maine and to other states. And today I want to share some of those examples, some of those stories. But I want to begin by providing a framework for these examples. So one of the characteristics of a healthy higher education ecosystem is diversity. Diversity in the kinds of schools, diversity in the sizes of schools, diversity of program offerings, and diversity of costs. And what this diversity allows for is choice, and ideally that's informed choice. We want our students and their families to be good informed consumers of higher education, to know what they're getting for what they're paying, and to make sure that they understand those implications. It's also important to recognize that there is a diversity of learners who are positioned to pursue undergraduate degrees, from high school students who want to get a head start on college, to what are sometimes called traditional students who intend to spend 4 years earning an undergraduate degree, to those who are identified as non-traditional students, working adults who are either returning to school to complete a degree or, in a number of cases, to earn an additional degree for career purposes. For high school students seeking to earn college credit while they're still in high school, several MICA members, including Thomas College and St. Joseph's, offer dual enrollment or early college options at little or no cost to the student. And we don't get reimbursement by the state for those programs, by the way. So it really is an offer to the students. And the credits they earn from Thomas or St. Joseph's, in most cases, can be transferred any place in the country. So they can take those credits and make them part of their overall experience. These courses are sometimes offered in partnership with local high schools and delivered at the high school. In other cases, high school students can take classes on a college campus and have a preview of what the college academic experience will be like. In either case, the credits earned this way provide advanced standing and reduce the ultimate cost of an undergraduate degree. For learners who want to pursue traditional four-year degrees, all MICA members offer significant financial aid and/or scholarship packages. For example, 98% of the University of New England undergraduates receive financial aid, and the average aid package there is about $24,000. At St. Joseph's, the percentage of traditional undergraduates who receive aid is also at 98%, and our average aid package is more than $31,000. Those aid packages typically include loans. NICU, the National Association of Independent Colleges and Universities, reports that for 2018-19, the average debt for graduates of private colleges nationally was $33,000. That repeats a number we saw earlier in the presentations. By comparison, UNE reports average debt for graduates from their bachelor's programs is in the $25,000 to $27,000 range. And at St. Joseph's, our average debt for graduates is slightly lower than $23,000, slightly lower at $23,000. And MICA members have higher graduation rates than the national average, which means that more of our students who take out loans to pay for college are in a position to repay them. We see that in the federal loan default rates for MICA members on average, which on average are lower than the national average, about 10%. In some cases, they're very low, but those schools have very few students with loans. So again, the averages are a little challenging. Loans are often a barrier to enrollment of first-generation lower-income students. So several MICA members have special programs designed to provide access to exactly this population of first-generation low-income and Pell Grant eligible students. Bates College, for instance, recently announced a $100 million program supported by the School of Educational Foundation, whose goal is to increase the number of students at Bates who are Pell eligible, low income, or undocumented by 50% over the next decade. At St. Joseph's, we recently announced the Talbot Scholars Program, which will allow first generation low income students to receive receive financial aid packages that meet the family's FAFSA calculated EFC without loans, one of the most significant barriers to access for this population. For students who begin their college careers at one of Maine's community colleges, a number of MICA schools have created transfer pathways through articulation agreements designed to maximize the number of credits that will transfer towards the bachelor's degree and thereby limit the overall cost of the bachelor's degree. In fact, MICA members will be participating in a New England Board of Higher Education virtual convening this Friday on expanding the NEBI-sponsored New England Transfer Guarantee Program to Maine. One goal of this project is to create more consistent and transparency in the ways that community colleges and the work that students do there transfer into Maine's four-year colleges and universities, both public and private. Now, for some students who begin at community college and are following a particular career path, there are additional special programs. So graduates of an associate's degree nursing program from one of Maine's community colleges can enroll in St. Joseph's online RN BSN program at a tuition price of $250 a credit, which is about a third, 30% less than our standard RN BSN per credit. If they did 60 credits in our RN BSN program at that rate, that would be an additional $15,000 in tuition to earn their Bachelor of Science degree after the community college tuition. We've also partnered with Maine Medical Center on a special program that enrolls MMC employees in an accelerated BSN program with total cost for the entire degree of less than $30,000. That's a 3-year program. These specially designed programs are addressing one of Maine's critical workforce needs in healthcare, of course. Other programs have been designed to bring affordable solutions to other areas of significant need in the state. I'll give you one more example from St. Joseph's. We're partnering with Southern Maine Community College and 7 school districts across the state to address the need to train the next generation of STEM educators for Maine schools. Supported by a 5-year, $1,444,000 grant from the National Science Foundation, our Robert Noyce Scholarship and Stipend Program selects students based on the basis of their academic achievement and passion for STEM teaching. Each of these Noyce scholars will receive a $25,000 scholarship for the final 2 years of their education at St. Joseph's, where they're going to study STEM and secondary education. Ultimately, Noyce scholars will work in high-need urban and rural school districts across Maine. In a recent Wallop Hub analysis of the relationship between the cost of college and the return, 3 of Maine's independent colleges, Colby, Husson, and St. Joseph's, led the ranking of all Maine's institutions of higher education, both private and public. All of MICA's members are proud of the work we do on affordability, access, and especially student success. And I'm pleased to have been able to share some of that work with you today. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions about that. And as the commission continues to do its work, we're happy to provide additional information. It would be helpful to know in what form you'd like it, because again, it takes a little while for us to gather information. And if we can put it into a consistent form that makes sense, I would be more than happy to provide you with that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, President DeLugas. Do I have any questions? Once, going twice. Okay, seeing none, thank you so much for your presentation. Definitely for future information. We definitely understand that, you know, Micah got a lot of cooks in the kitchen there and get all the word out. Oh, Rocket, real quick.
Well, it actually wasn't necessarily a question directly for Mr. Lugatz, but I had a question. He talked about the early college. And what is the realistic expectation of how many college courses a high school student can take? And, you know, obviously save that money at the next level.
Yeah, so I think it's going to depend a little bit on the way the students are doing this early or this pre-college work, right? The traditional way would have been through advanced placement courses that they would have taken in their high schools, and they would have taken the advanced placement test, and that would have cost them more money. The programs that we're describing are not advanced placement. They really are. They're so in the case of the Thomas program, high school classes are being taught by high school teachers in collaboration with Thomas College faculty to make sure that the content and the outcomes are the equivalent of Thomas College courses. that are being taught in the high school. So that could be, in the course of a junior and senior year, there could be as many courses as you have in a year of college. Absolutely. At St. Joseph's, we do both high school-based teaching of the kind I described with the Thomas program, but we also have early scholars come to campus and take our classes, and they're do maybe half a year's worth of work in that context. So it could be a half a year to a full year, depending on the particular situation and the energy of those learners.
Oh, that's great.
Can I add to that, sir?
Yes.
You probably know that we have a cap on 12 credits per year per student. But I just wanted to mention that because the limitation of the funding available primarily, we have started to encourage, rather than students getting 30 or 40 credit hours, that we expand, that the mission would be expand the opportunity to more students as opposed to, fewer students with more credit hours. So philosophically, we went from a mission to grow as fast as possible to back to the number of credits offered to the more students participating. Does that make sense?
Definitely. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to pass it over to Liz True to talk about the Maine Maritime Academy and their work on affordability and completion. So the floor is yours.
Terrific. I'm going to see if I can share my screen, and if not, I have Sam as backup. All right.
And if you wouldn't mind seeing if it'll go full screen, I don't know. It's sort of sometimes letting people do it, sometimes not. So fingers crossed. And the mailman is that's good. I'm going to put myself up.
Terrific. Okay. So Senator Daughtry and Representative Crockett and members of the commission, I'm honored to serve in this important commission again for personal and professional reasons. I'm wearing at least 3 hats as I sit in this meeting. In addition to being a public college administrator, I'm also the Union 76 School Board Chair for Sedgwick, Brooklyn, and Deer Isle, where we have a large number of students living in poverty. I'm also the single parent of a college senior majoring in education at UMaine, who is grateful for Maine's 529 plan. My parents were Maine first-generation college students. When my dad studied agriculture at UMaine in the early 50s, he couldn't afford to live in campus housing. So he negotiated a deal to sleep in the cow barn and take care of the dairy cows. Thanks to the education my parents received, which elevated them out of rural poverty, they made it possible for me to attend one of those expensive but affordable Seven Sisters colleges. And I'm now a college vice president. That's a long way from the cow barn. I'm committed to making college accessible and affordable to all Maine students, especially first generation ones. MMA has traditionally served this population and can transform the lives and futures of Maine students. I'd like to provide some information on what we've been doing at MMA since the commission last met to address affordability and completion. So some of the initiatives are our capital campaign, a strategic enrollment management consultancy, and our Center for Professional Mariner Development. Our capital campaign, we launched in March of 2020. It was a $20 million goal, and the campaign goals were reached by December 2021. Since 2015, 48 new endowed scholarships with a minimum gift of $25,000 have been established. Our endowed scholarship funds doubled in this time from 20 million to 41 million. And the annual allocation of endowed scholarships has increased from 750,000 in fiscal year 2018 to 1.2 million this year. In terms of strategic enrollment management, we engaged the services of Ruffalo Noel Levitz, an enrollment management company, to help us assess recruitment, retention, and financial aid strategies. Given some of the limited numbers of financial aid dollars we had, we wanted to make sure they were used most effectively. As a result of this consultancy, we implemented many new initiatives for retention and recruitment. We also hired a new vice president for enrollment management and marketing. I had been doing that job as well as student affairs for the last 7 years. And we hired a financial aid consultant this year to review and update financial aid policies and procedures. Finally, we established in 2020 the Center for Professional Mariner Development in Bucksport. We opened it in February 2020, and you all know what happened in March of 2020. So we have not met our enrollment goals initially, but they are picking up now. The center offers online, hybrid, and in-person courses to provide certification and professional development training for mariners. Our hope is that this will provide a revenue stream to help with our overall costs of the academy and provide some additional funding so that to reduce the burden on tuition. Some data points since 2014. I'll be sharing cost of attendance, retention rates, graduation rates, first generation numbers, financial aid, and placement rates. Our direct costs from 2014 are on the left and 2021 are on the right. So these direct costs would be room and board, tuition, and fees. And for our unlimited license majors, which is our Keystone program, which is preparing students to gain a U.S. Coast Guard license to be either a deck or engine officer in the Merchant Marine. The cost was $32,722 in 2014. It's now gone up to $36,318. For the other majors, you see the increase is about $3,000 since 2014. Our licensed majors do have essentially a third semester each summer. They either go on cruise on our training ship or do something called cadet shipping. So, and essentially they're attending college year round. And I'll be talking a little bit later on about worth as well as the cost of providing this education. Retention, you can see that our retention hovers around 80%, and that is part of our strategic enrollment management goals, is to have it consistently above 80%. You see the drop in the class that entered in 2019. So it'd be first year, full-time first year students who were retained from the first fall they enrolled to return their sophomore year. And you'll see that drop in the class of 2019. Many of our students were reluctant to return for hybrid education in the fall of 2020 or fears that we would go fully remote. And so they stopped out. We don't have full numbers for this year yet, but we have seen some of those students come back once we return to fully in-person classes. One of the things about Maine Maritime education is you can't learn many of our classes like firefighting or boat handling on a Zoom class. It has to be hands-on and in person. So that's been very challenging for us as we cope with the pandemic, but we're back on track and in person and able to do that hands-on education. Oops. Next. Our 6-year graduation rates, you can see, have steadily increased, and the last cohort reported was at 74%, which we're very proud of. Representative Roach, I think, asked about the 4-year graduation rate, and that is 59%. So we do have some students that take a bit longer just because of having to get in all those summer experiences and stay on track for that. First generation, like the other colleges, we do have a high percentage of first generation college students. About 40% or higher each year is defined as first generation. However, it's exciting to report that 78% of the group that came in 2019 were persisted to the second year. This was an 8% increase over the previous year and is in keeping with our overall retention numbers. So being a first generation student at Maine Maritime does not appear to impact their retention because in so many ways, our education is so different from other colleges that being first generation may not have the same disadvantages it might elsewhere. Financial aid, again, similar to some of the proportions others were talking about. In 2014, 91% of our students had some kind of financial aid. In 2020, 96%. These are students receiving scholarships. Debt. We'll talk about debt here. You often see Maine Maritime on a list of one of the highest debt loads. And there's a reason for that. Obviously, the cost of providing an education such as we provide is expensive. And students do need to take out loans to do that. We get 23% of our operating budget from the state allocation. The rest has to come from tuition and scholarships. So our average loan debt increased from $52,000 for the class of 2016 to $55,687 for the class of 2021. However, our default rates are extraordinarily low, as you can see here. And that is because of the high salaries and high placement of the students when they graduate. Many of our students walk out and have a six-figure job when they graduate. I overheard a conversation this summer between graduates from the class of 18, 19, and 20. All three of them were buying houses. I didn't buy my first house until I was 40, and they were buying them 2 and 3 years after graduation. And I happen to know that the member of the class of 2018 had an extraordinary debt load when he graduated, but was able to pay it all down and is now looking at purchasing a home. Placement is really critical for us. 90%, our slogan is 90% of our students will be employed within 90 days of graduation. And this continues to be true. We don't hear from all of the students, we hear from the majority. And in the class of 2020, 93% were employed within 90 days, and 98% were employed within 90 days. So that is the end of my presentation, but I did note, in comparison to what the system provided, we can provide that same data as soon as I get back to campus so that you can all have comparative data. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Liz. Do I have any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your presentation. It is always interesting when you're looking at the debt burden for an MMA education, but then keeping in mind that, these are around it, making a lot higher than a studio or liberal arts degree. Not that I would know anything about that at all.
Yes, we talk about worth and the worth of that education. And again, as others have mentioned, there's a big difference with when you have a $53,000 debt loan when you're going to be making $100,000 at graduation.
Absolutely. Well, with that, thank you so much for your presentation and for your time and insight. And we're going to be moving on to our next presentation. We'll be having the Maine Community College System present, and we have their Chief Financial Officer, Pam, hopefully I'm not massacring her last name, Miris Morin, as well as we'll be having their Chief Academic Officer, Janet Sorter, as well as President Dagler presenting. And with that, the floor is yours. Becky, if you can enter full screen on the presentation, it'll be a little easier to see. It should let you, if you go up to view, it should let you do full screen. Perfect. Thank you. Good to go.
Senator Daughtry, I think that Pam and Janet are ready to go, but I'm not hearing them. So
we were waiting for you to introduce us, but I will begin.
Ah, well, we have Janet Sorter who's the Vice President and Chief Academic Officer, and Pam Ramirez, who is the Chief Financial Officer, and well equipped for this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you for inviting us to present. Becky, next slide. So the Maine Community College System, as you know, is a system of 7 colleges spread the breadth and width of Maine. Our enrollment this year is for 2020, 2021 academic year was 16,000 degree-seeking students and 6,300 in short-term training. 56% of our students are full-time, 44 are part-time, but that can differ dramatically from college to college. For example, 67% of the students at Washington County Community College are full-time, and an equal number, 66%, are at York County Community College are part-time. And we have everything in between those numbers. We have and are proud to have the lowest tuition in New England at $96 a credit hour. The annual average for students for a year is $3,700 for tuition and fees, another $1,400 in books and supplies, and then $5,400 to $9,500 for room and board. 5 of our colleges have residence halls, 2 do not. And our residence halls house, I would say, a minority of the student population. We are primarily commuter schools. For nearly half of all degree-seeking students, grant aid covers the full cost of tuition and fees. And for many more, that aid covers significantly more than tuition and fees, cost of living, cost of attendance. 74% of first-time full-time students receive grant aid, and 67% of all undergraduates receive some form of grant aid. Next screen, please. This screen is a little hard to read, but the colors are quite clear. So this screen gives you a picture of our enrollments over the last 10 years, from 2002 to 20, almost 20 years, 18 years to 2020. After making the transition from a technical college in 2002 to a community college in 2003, our enrollment system-wide grew to an all-time high in 2011 of 17,911 students, a 76.9% increase. The enrollment growth was particularly attributable to the expanded mission of the institutions, with more students enrolling in liberal studies programs and taking advantage of transfer agreements to our four-year partners, particularly the UMaine system. The decline in recent years in degree-seeking enrollments is partially a result of the reduction in the number of students graduating from Maine high schools, but also from the improved employment opportunities. As you'll see from the lighter orange, we started tracking our dual enrollment students in 2016, and they constitute about 22% of our enrollment. And at most of our colleges, they are a great feeder system for future degree-seeking students. Next slide, Becky. Thank you. We have made and we are making great efforts to support our students to increase student success and persistence to completing a degree and credential. And that's not just in terms of traditional financial aid. We have added a lot of student navigators, and navigators are really critical because they, as the word suggests, help our students navigate higher education from the minute they come onto our campus till they complete their program of study. They're often tied to a very specific program and work with cohorts of students throughout their career and really create a bond and become mentors and advisors to those students. Providing support for our students beyond financial aid is critical just in terms of life. Food pantries, every single one of our campus has food pantries. All of our campuses, all of our colleges provide emergency aid, so students can come in and say, you know, they need a tune-up for the car they can't afford, or they need new tires, or they need gas money. And we have tried to make sure that emergency aid is there so that these little small emergencies don't interrupt a student's ability to go to class. So there's no complex paperwork, and it can often be as simple as an instructor or a navigator who knows these students personally, calling up the dean and saying, you know, Johnny Smith or Jane Smith has a problem. Can we help them? Food pantries are interesting because they don't provide just food. They provide personal care items. They provide clothing, particularly focus on providing interview clothes for students who are going out looking for jobs. And that is a really important benefit or way to support students to move forward. During the pandemic, a really important student need arose, and that is and became our tech promise. We are committed that lack of ability for a student to afford a computer or internet access will not be a barrier to attending college. So we have very generous loaner systems, give out hotspots, anything we can do to make sure that students have the tools that they need. And supporting our special populations of students, new Mainers, veterans, is first-gen students is critical to making sure that they are able to navigate higher ed in our institutions and persist. OER is an important way in which we are supporting students in classes, and that's open educational resources. Many of our colleges are really taking a hard look at the cost of textbooks and supplies and trying to find ways to lower those costs to the point where there is no cost by using open resources. Next page, Becky. We also want to support our students to completion by trying to make sure that they are on a clear path, that they know what the courses that are required in that path are, and they have structured choices. So we are working to institute guided pathways across our colleges. Guided pathways seek to streamline students' journey by providing very structured curriculum and laying out the curriculum through their entire program of study. Revamping support so that their advisors and navigators are there every step of the way on their path, that they have clear learning outcomes so they know and can make the connection between what they're learning in their programs of study and that connecting that to the work that they hope to be doing when they complete, and ultimately helping more students to achieve their college completion goals. The 4 pillars of guided pathways are to clarify the path and to make sure that students are not taking courses and credits that they do not need for their program of study, that they enter the path and choose a path that is connected to their goals and interests. They stay on that path. And that's a very important role that advisors and navigators play. And then ensure the learning that follows through and ensure that they can keep going when they finish our programs onto the next step. We also have really tried to provide a lot of different opportunities for students to study. So many of our colleges have taken a look at their traditional 15-week semester and broken that up into shorter terms so that students can make a real commitment for a shorter period of time that is maybe easier for them in their life, to do accelerated programs, to do more hybrid courses. So there are a lot of options available to students. We started this work with math pathways, and math is a huge barrier for students in completing their programs of study. And we took a hard look with our university partners at what math courses we were requiring for our programs of study, moved away from algebra for everybody, and tried to and did match the math requirement to the math skills that would be required in the actual program. So statistics in a business course or in nursing, quantitative reasoning, applied tech math in our trade and technical programs. And we have seen remarkable improvements in math completion through math pathways. The other Robert mentioned our work together on early college. An important commitment that we've all made is that we want to see students in early college programs taking credits with a purpose, that they're connecting the courses they take, not just to take college courses, but that they will be courses that will apply to the program of study that they are heading toward. And building transfer pathways from our programs to the university programs so that students, again, are taking courses that will apply to their baccalaureate program of study. An interesting program that 3 of our colleges are offering is called Spring Ahead. And this program is offered to select high school seniors in their spring semester who have completed all of their high school requirements, and they come to our college campus and start their college career in their spring semester of their senior year. And it's been a very successful program. Next slide, please. So an important part of our work is helping students to choose their path. We want students to look at the path they're on is starting where they need to start, when they need to start it. So students can start by earning a badge or a micro-credential and be ready to use that credential to apply to work and to explore other options. Our short-term training programs provide the opportunity for students to be retrained to learn skills for entry-level positions. Those can lead then to a certificate program so that they can make a little bit bigger commitment to enter a high skill, high wage field. And then a 2-year degree so they can start their college credential and then transfer to a 4-year program. Our students are not just straight from high school. They're adult learners with complicated lives. So we really are trying to get people to be able to access education in very manageable bites. To give you an example, our biggest student population are 18 to 24-year-old students. They constitute 44% of our students. Our traditional age students, 17 and under, and are only 24% of our population. In the 25 to 39 are an equal 24%. So having a lot of options for our students to be able to start a program, to have broad access, and then support them through the steps, whether they're little steps or big steps on the path to their reaching their goal, is extremely important. And now I'd like to introduce my colleague Pam, who will talk about the finances.
Thanks, Janet. My name is Pam Ramirez-Morin, and I am the CFO for the system. Prior to having this position, I was at Central Maine Community College for 10 years, and going back another lifetime, 30 plus years ago, I worked for the Maine Vocational Technical Colleges. I'm going to start with looking at the progress that we've made since 2014. The first goal that we had was our Navigating Success program. This was a goal to hire 15 additional student success counselors at an annual cost of about $1 million to serve what was then 16,000 Maine students. There were 2 private donations that we received for over $2 million that supported these navigators at each of the colleges statewide. Janet touched on the student navigators as one of our support programs. The grants ran from 2016 to 2019. They funded 1 navigator at each college and 2 at one of the colleges. Additionally, we also had a peer advisor piece to this program where students had benefited from having a navigator, could be peer advisors to other students. In the year 2020, the colleges started receiving part of their appropriation in direct support for these navigator positions, and this is going to be ongoing funding. The next goal was the increased funding by an annual cost of $2 million for additional work study opportunities. And the colleges have, we have a College Works for Me branded program, which is intended to strengthen the student retention and completion by fostering greater engagement in campus life and with campus staff. The students work and the employers that they work for, the campus employers, serve as their mentors. They get engaged in those different departments that they work in and have that community feel. The additional benefits are to build a work schedule that's around their course schedule so that it works for their academic endeavors, and then the connection to the college community for them to assist them to completion. The students benefit from that engagement, and the Racino funds were used for a portion of that $7.8 million. That was a $1.9 million investment in workforce opportunities that was funded through the Racino and then an additional 5.9 that's come from operating funds at all 7 campuses. The third goal is to create an alternative semester scholarship. This was looking at summer semester. Pell Grants opened to summer semester usage in 2017-2018 award year. Prior to summer Pell, MCCS expended about $225,000 of our Racino funds in direct support of summer scholarships. A couple different initiatives at a couple of the colleges. We also run a student success initiative that kind of blends into the next goal, and this includes a scholarship component, and most of the schools held these at the end of summer, right before the start of the fall semester. The attraction and retention scholarships can also be given for summer semesters. The last goal is the expand the student success academies. Again, student success initiatives were put in place to help address some of the remedial academic issues that some of our students face. The expansion was to serve an additional 500 students. The commission also learned that MCCS is currently devoting considerable existing resources toward this effort. As I mentioned, the Student Success Initiative funding since 2014 as part of the alternative semester scholarship goal has been 3.7, almost 3.8 million across the system. It's actually a little bit more because in 2020, we combined those, our attraction and retention scholarship, as well as the Student Success Initiative. So we're putting those funds together to address these issues. The scholarships under Student Success for the Attraction Retention Program are capped at $5,000 per fiscal year. That's for fall, it's $2,000. For spring, it's $2,000, and then $1,000 for summer. Next slide. This slide shows our sources of revenue for the last 21 years. And as you can see, the appropriation is in the green, and that's the largest category of our revenue. As Ryan mentioned, it's decreased over the 21 years. In 2001, it was 50% of our revenue, and in 2021, it's now 37% of our revenue. Student revenue, which is normally our second largest category of revenue, but for in 2021, that was replaced with our HERF funding that has taken over that second place spot. Shown here in purple is the federal grant area, and that's where we're showing our HERF funding. In 2021, the system recognized $25 million in HERF funding, and that was for both student emergency funds and institutional funds that we received. Another category that's worth noting is the dark red and the orange, which represent auxiliary revenue. These are revenues from dorms, cafeterias, and facility rental. And that has consistently been about 10% of our budget. And in 2001, that revenue decreased to just 2%. We had significantly less students in our dorms and on campus for social distancing. So that was the result of that move. Some of our colleges also rent facilities for weddings and meetings and other events, and those obviously did not happen at the same level in FY21. I think we can go to the next one. The expenses over the last 3 years, like most colleges and universities, the majority of our expense comes from wages and benefits. Right around 2/3 of our budget is spent on salary and benefits. And then we have the supplies and services at 24%, and student aid not registering a percentage that's not the student aid that we're thinking of as far as financial aid, and then our depreciation at 9%. Next one, Becky. The functional expenses, these show where we, and I've lost my page. These show where we've expended what category of functional expense we've expended our budget in for the last 3 years. Majority of our spending is in the instruction and academic support area. 49% of our operating expenses in 2021 are represented in instruction and academic support, an increase of about 13.8% in institutional support is due in large part to continued spending required by the system to pivot to remote work and remote learning. This work started in 2020, and you can see that we had an increase of 8.6% in instruction and 17.8% in the institutional support. These expenditures included technology and equipment that was needed for remote learning. Auxiliary expenses saw a sharp decline of $2.3 million or 40.4%, and that was due to the reduction in our dorm occupancy and the number of students living and eating on campus. And I believe that's our last slide. It is.
It is. So thank you. The one thing I'd interject as an overlay of this is that traditionally the income pattern of students that attend community colleges tends to be lower than the four-year institutions. That's a national truth. And so good deal of our numbers reflect that reality. And as I indicated earlier, I think it's also important. One of the things that we've seen tremendous growth in short-term training programs, mostly from students who come to us and say that they don't really want to participate in what they call classroom work. They want to learn with their hands. They want to, be out in the field. When I talk to those students, I have to say that they are both intelligent and aggressive. And very sure of their educational mission in life and how they want to attain that mission. Now, when I talk to students like that when they're a few years older, some of that moxie changes, and that they're more interested in trying to get a formal education. But I do think that on both the affordability and the completion side, we need to be attentive to the students that we're serving, the nature of those students, and some work that we've found with completion rates are that students lack goals. They're not necessarily always sure why they're in a classroom, and they tend to fade out because of that. But I'm sure Janet and Pam can answer any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the presentation, and definitely a lot of interesting things to think about and a lot of the challenges that are faced by the community college system that aren't necessarily shared with our other institutions as well. Do I have any questions for our panelists? Seeing none, I just want to thank you all for taking the time and putting together that very thorough presentation. And I'll keep sounding like I'm beating a dead horse on this, but the resources will be available on the website, and we can also send everything out to folks as well to be able to have as a really important reference as we move forward. So with that, that does conclude our presentations for the day. I am seeing a little bit of Zoom fatigue settle into people's faces and eyes. Very familiar with that look. I do want to just take a little bit time to talk about our next meeting and just, looking at what we have. We went over pretty quickly about the different, duties and responsibilities. And it's clear from the conversations today that many different questions have also popped up in addition to what we have there keeping in mind what's been going on with the pandemic and a variety of other things as well. So I think I just sort of wanted to maybe just, we don't need to come up with an answer about this, but just sort of bring it up to folks to keep in the back of their mind. We're supposed to, according to the authorizing legislation, report back with recommendations on January 2nd. I don't know about all of you, but when I look at my work calendar in both of my jobs, that's a pretty big lift between now and January. So definitely have reached out to sort of find out potentially one thing by not being staffed by the legislature's OPLA office and having the able assistants, both Sam and Becky, does mean we can actually meet in the interim when we're in session. But just to flag it for everyone that that's something that we can look into to maybe get ourselves a little bit more time. And we are authorized, I think, currently for 4 meetings. So just to bring that up. But I think at this point, we had a really great foundation today. We had a really great snapshot of what's being done currently, you know, what we're looking at of our different institutions. And I think, you know, in our future meetings are where we're going to, you know, move back into a little bit what's on the duties, a little bit dig deeper into that NEBI report that Sam was able to work with them really well to get for us today. But I wanted to sort of see if there's any requests, first off, any requests for information or presenters or anyone you can think of that you think would be useful for all of us, or just any general questions moving forward. Representative Salisbury.
Thanks. Thanks, Maddie. Just really quickly, I've been thinking a little bit about, we've had a lot of in our committee talk about technical schools and that sort of the drive to have students take more technical programs and trades. And I'm wondering how all that might play into what we're talking about here, how that, you know, sort of that focus on having students do that, how that plays into students going to college and then therefore playing a, you know, a role in some of that. So I don't know if there's some, or maybe it's not something we want to investigate, but just something I've been thinking about.
Definitely, it's actually part of our charge to look into that.
Okay.
So excited to have someone like Hilary with us about, you know, navigating that pipeline of suggestions for what your post-secondary path looks like. So it's definitely something we can reach out about as well. Colleen?
Yeah, if I could, just to pick up on that point, you know, I think that we just barely touched on or referenced a funnel or the pipeline one time. There's been no conversation yet about K-12. And I know in the previous commission, there was a bit of attention paid to that. But when I think about things like, you know, structures in place to make sure that students in the K-12 experience are aware of the different kinds of post-secondary education, what kinds of career opportunities they are, how to link a career interest with a post-secondary opportunity, and of course, how you pay for that. I think everybody on here knows that most kids start, you know, they might think about post-secondary education in middle school or high school, but nobody thinks about how to start paying for it until they're a senior in high school, right? You know, for the most part. And so that just puts a lot of families up against it right at the very end, which is why you experience the summer melt a lot of places do. So I just wanted to, again, kind of elevate that. And I know we just started to talk about it, but I think that kind of, you know, we talked about just a minute ago, Janet was talking about pathways, right? Once you're in the institution, but I think also really exploring pathways on the way to there and having some intentionality and awareness and understanding of how those disparate pieces stick together and fit together in a way that gives kids and families some confidence that they're on a path that makes sense for them.
I think one thing to add on that I've heard is people described as on-ramps. What opportunities are we making available for individuals to be able to figure out where they're wanting to get, you know, on and off on their post-secondary journey? And I think definitely hearing the comments, I think definitely having NEBI at the next meeting and maybe doing more of a focus on that sort of pipeline and transition and, you know, looking at how students are navigating all of this is definitely one of the themes that I think we've been hearing all day. Representative Crockett and then President Dagler.
Yes, thank you, Senator Daughtry. Along those same lines, you know, with hopefully at our next meeting, if willing, Ms. Bush would kind of give us a, you know, just a feel. What are her instincts on the possibilities of expanding that pipeline, you know, through the resources that are there in K through 12, obviously, whether that's counselors or other avenues. And not sure if there is anyone in that at that level that would be a great guest speaker to come and educate us on those possibilities.
Definitely. President Dagler?
I do want to follow up on Colleen's. You're going to think that we rehearsed this in the background, and we really didn't. But actually, from what Colleen was speaking about, and to put it in the language of the 10-year economic plan, it's also not only pathways and on-ramps, but really that career exploration piece. And to the extent that we do take a look at that as an avenue for enhancing, again, especially the completion aspect of affordability and completion, I would encourage us to think about it as a pipeline and to go back into especially middle school as a way of sort of shaping career attitude and then educational attitude around careers. It will help students, sort of identify those on-ramps through early college opportunities that have meaningful benefits to their longer-term goals, but it also helps educate both parents and students about what they need to do in the academic environment in order to succeed in a career that may look really interesting and appealing to them.
Absolutely, and agreed. And despite the puppy attack midway, I definitely think that's a good direction to head into. Other questions? Yes, Robert.
So on that note, again, I mentioned the great partnership with the community college folks. There are two people that I may suggest. You asked if we could invite a guest, Amy and Mercedes. Amy from our offices and Mercedes from theirs. And they can talk to you about an innovative thing they did just this last year to create exactly what you're talking about. They have these roadmaps. So it asks the students in sort of that high school level viewpoint of what are you interested in? Do you like working with people? Do you like doing this? And it sort of guides them into different fields and lets them do some exploration of the possibilities right there as a part of the early college experience. So it'd be interesting, I think, for the group to hear about that project.
That'd be great. Actually, let's make sure we get that jot down to reach out to them. Other suggestions? I'd say, Ms. Bush, please, if you can think of anyone and yourself or anyone in your profession who you think would be helpful, please send suggestions our way.
Okay, I will. I know my corner of the state, but I will think about that.
Perfect. Not seeing any other comments, I think we might actually be able to adjourn a few. I see one question real quick from Colleen. One specific data question. What do we know about student debt for those who have some college but no degree? I'd be interested in knowing about the debt itself as well as demographics of who fits this profile. I do know this is something that we've looked into in prior years, and I know that statistic is out there, but definitely having it come before us. And that can be something I haven't had a chance to go fully through everything from NEBI, but I know that's something we've discussed on NEBI as well. So just a reminder, if you have any other suggestions. Robert, did you have a?
I was just going to say that that particular data point is even more problematic than the debt of our graduates, because often we don't know. They leave, they haven't reported, they didn't get the loans from us. If they did, and even if we now I know the University of Maine system, we can tell you our debt levels for our students, but then it's very hard to compare with other institutions because they may or may not report it the same way for their non. But that's the worst scenario, right? You get 90 credits and you don't finish and you have debt and you don't have the opportunity for an advanced work option. So.
And also that debt might not just be on the individual as well, it can be on their family too. So
exactly.
Complicated, hard to measure, but very real debt aspects. I mean, I have this anecdote all the time, but out of my core group of best friends, I have 4 who have gone through that experience and had to struggle with dealing with that type of debt. So any other questions? Oh yes, National Student Clearinghouse is incredible. Yeah, we should definitely highlight that as well. Colleen, thanks for that good reminder. Just a reminder, please send any questions or any suggestions. I know for me, sometimes I often think of things, afterwards, not in the moment. So please send those comments to myself and my co-chair, Representative Crockett, and a huge thank you to everyone today. Before we end, I'll just kick it over to Ed if you want to make some comments, and then we'll wrap things up.
Yeah, I just want to really thank everybody for their, engaging participation. It's, this is a topic that, we talk about literally, I think, on the hour in the legislature, and just trying to make, it just increase the opportunities for the young people. And obviously their biggest struggle today, as well as their extended families, it's about the dollars, and finding ways to make their education experience as valuable as possible, and not burden them too much into their careers, goes a long way. And I think we're well on our way, because I learned so much today from what's already happening, and it's awesome what is happening. And I think just getting that message out is going to build a better communication between the parties, and the picture will get a lot clearer, and I think better.
Definitely. Thank you, Representative Crockett. And one thing you just reminded me of, and I think I'll look at Jason on this one, but training and really sort of like Educate Maine has done a lot of great work on this, and so I'll definitely make sure we coordinate to highlight that. But the various facets that can be done before and after, and that it's not just our young people who are facing this as well. I mean, everyone's heard on the news about sort of like the great migration and the large amount of people quitting their jobs historically. And not only has the face of our nation changed completely in our reality under this pandemic, but I think the reality of education has shifted as well. So one thing for all of us to keep thinking about is, for those who have left the workforce, many people might start considering training for a different profession at any age, whether it's 18 to, I actually just heard about a woman getting her PhD at the age of 85. So you never know where in that continuum someone might be. So with that, we're going to finish 6 minutes early, which feels pretty good to me. I want to thank you all. I know it's been a long day. For those of you who are not legislators and don't have to regularly sit through these million-hour marathons, thank you very much for your time and for your willingness to serve. And with that, I will adjourn the commission, and we'll